Hi, I'm Sarah.
And I'm Rena. We're very happy to welcome you to
Biopic, a podcast story. This is a podcast where we dissect the good, the bad, the ugly, and absurd of this specific genre of motion picture, the biopic. If you want to learn more about us, our scoring system, and how we choose movies, please check out our special introductory episode titled Introduction, Who Are We and What Are We Doing?
Sarah. What movie are we doing this week?
This week, we will be talking about Frida. And Rena, can you give us the trigger warning?
This movie contains depictions of bus crashes, medical problems, chronic pain, adultery, and communism. Sarah, can you think of anything that I may have left out?
Harvey Weinstein. Hopefully no one turned off the show, but yes, the triggeriest trigger warning of them all. We will be talking about Harvey Weinstein. He's not on camera, but his fingerprints are all over this motion picture. And Rena, can you please give us the spoiler warning?
Spoiler warning. We are going to spoil everything, including possibly the major plot points in works of narrative art that have nothing to do with Frida. Consider yourself warned.
Some of the sources we used in order to build out this episode include Frida, a biography of Frida Kahlo by Hayden Herrera, The Heart, Frida Kahlo in Paris by Marc Petitjean, or possibly Marc Petitjean. That's the American way that we would say it.
Sarah, can you please tell us a little bit about the artist Frida Kahlo and the movie Frida?
From our friends at Wikipedia, Magdalena Carmen Frida Kahlo y Calderón was born July 6th in 1907, and she passed away July 13th in 1954. She was a Mexican painter known for her many portraits, self-portraits, and work inspired by the nature and artifacts of Mexico. Inspired by the country's popular culture, she employed a naive folk art style to explore questions of identity, post-colonialism, gender, class, and race in Mexican society. Her paintings often had strong autobiographical elements and mixed realism with fantasy. Kahlo has been described as a surrealist or a magical realist. She is also known for painting about her experience of chronic pain. Frida the movie is a 2002 American biographical film directed by Julie Taymor, and it depicts the professional and private life of Frida Kahlo, starring Salma Hayek in an Academy Award-nominated portrayal of Kahlo and Alfred Molina as her husband, Diego Rivera. The film was adapted by Clancy Siegel, Diane Lake, Gregory Nava Thomas, Antonio Banderas, and unofficially by Edward Norton from the 1983 book that we mentioned earlier, Frida, a biography of Frida Kahlo by Hayden Herrera. Frida received generally positive reviews from critics and won 2 Academy Awards for Best Makeup and Best Original Score. The film was a success. It made $56 million worldwide against a $12 million budget. In December 2017, in an op-ed for the New York Times, Salma Hayek stated that Harvey Weinstein attempted to thwart the making of this film because Hayek refused to grant him sexual favors, and that he had threatened to shut down the film unless Hayek agreed to include a full frontal nude sex scene with herself and another woman. In response to this piece, Weinstein claimed that none of the sexual allegations made by Salma Hayek were accurate and that he did not recall pressuring Hayek to do a gratuitous sex scene. Salma Hayek had to sue Harvey Weinstein for breach of contract before the filming of the movie, as he threatened to replace her with another actress, despite the fact that she had brought the project to him with an agreement that she would produce and star in the film.
This is horrendous. I am sorry. So sorry for Salma Hayek that she went through that. I am all the more impressed that she managed to pull Frida from that fire.
It's a real tragic commentary on what it took to get a movie made about a female artist by women. Harvey Weinstein is garbage, which I know is a really controversial take here in the year of our Lord 2024. The stories of him and his engagement with this film are hugely depressing because he was allowed to do what he did without any sort of retribution. He also terrorized Julie Taymor. Salma Hayek was driven to tears on many occasions, and she did eventually commit to filming that scene with another actress, which we will talk about when we get there, basically because she felt like she just had no other cards to play in order to get this movie made. It's disgusting, and there's really no hell deep enough for Harvey Weinstein and the shit that he did to actresses simply because he could. We also have Ashley Judd in this film in a brief appearance, and we know also that Harvey Weinstein terrorized her and destroyed her career. It's a huge bummer that overshadowed the movie a little bit as I was watching it, because you just feel the hand of Harvey Weinstein over this film too at certain points.
One frustration that I had in researching Frida was that it was much easier to find children's books about her, both in general and at the city's public library systems, than to find grown-up biographies. I ultimately had to use my Amazon points to get the biography by Hayden Herrera that the film is based on in time for podcast recording. I wondered, gosh, what about this woman's highly complex life of extramarital affairs and severe medical issues says this is great for kids?
I have it on very good authority that children spend a lot of time learning about the art of Frida Kahlo in elementary school, which I don't think they talk about Trotsky, Diego Rivera's philandering, but they do talk about her chronic pain. City kids are sophisticated, so maybe they can handle it. I do think that Frida's work is very accessible and a great way to introduce young people to a lot of concepts in art. And her life was bananas and definitely not safe for children in a lot of ways.
Because she was a woman doing figurative art on easels and mostly relatively small paintings in the 20th century, when the big, bold, masculine ideal is about Jackson Pollock and abstract expressionism on giant canvases. Is she not worth having biographies for grown-ups? I perceived something of an attitude of infantilization.
I think you're right about that. There is like sort of this whole genre of children's book now of like the cutesy little like who is gold in my ear? It's like pretty complicated kids. Or Frida Kahlo dolls, things like that, where they're introducing these very sophisticated people who lived very complex lives in a charming way. There's a book that I've seen for children about Coco Chanel, and I'm like, wasn't she a Nazi? Do you think that's in there? Going back to Frida, though, this sort of infantilizing energy around her work, and maybe that's because it's in pretty colors. Her work is very complex, but it is really easy to illustrate a golden book with the Casa Azul. And I'm gonna just drop in right here again. She had an affair with Leon Trotsky.
She sure did. And we will be talking about this. Mexico City is its own character in this film. I've been there twice, and it is beautiful. It is a Baroque city in North America, and everything has a unique sense of ancient richness to it that may remind you of Europe, but that you won't find in the USA or Canada. I highly recommend it. I've been to the Casa Azul, one of the houses that Frida lived in, and I also went to the Museo Anahuacalli, where they have Diego Rivera's collection of artifacts and his studies that he made for the mural that was destroyed at Rockefeller Center. I've also seen the version of it that is in the Palacio de Bellas Artes in Mexico City, and there are murals there by David Siqueiros, the guy that Antonio Banderas portrays magnetically in one scene.
So should we get into this movie?
Let's get into this movie, Sarah.
I want to first note that Julie Taymor, who directed this, is one of my favorite and also is probably one of the most confounding artists in the entertainment industry. Love her. But I also understand that she is in block letters, not for everyone. But I was really excited to watch this movie with her vision attached to it. Across the Universe is one of my favorite movies ever, and I don't care if people hate it. I find it delightful, and I find her work really interesting. And I was excited to see our friend Ellie Goldenthal, who contributed one of the only good parts of Cobb, which was the score. Back here with us to do the music for this. And also worth noting is that he and Julie Taymor are a power couple and have been since 1980. So does she dangle her MacArthur grant in front of him as the trump card that you get to throw out when you're having an argument about something? And the end of that argument is him declared a genius by the MacArthur Foundation. I have a grant for it. I'm recognized for it. You are not. You have to take out the trash. That could potentially be a source of resentment if you are the person who doesn't have the MacArthur grant. Personally, if I had a MacArthur grant, I would be throwing that out there to everybody all the time as a reason that I don't have to do things. Anyway, I love the opening credits, and I felt Julie Taymor's singular vision all over the opening credits. And I also loved how this started really fun with seeing Frida being loaded into her bed in her constant pain to be taken to her first art show, Mexico, and she was refusing to miss it. And her doctor told her, you cannot get out of bed. So they carried her to the show in her bed, which was baller. And I loved it. She does that thing where she turned her head and all of a sudden she was young Frida. But I don't know if you noticed this, but it looked really weird at first. Like they put Salma Hayek's face on a little girl's body.
She does look like a bobblehead in those early scenes.
It was very jarring to me and I was concerned for a moment, but then it kind of evened out, and her teenage boyfriend here is played by the adorable baby Diego Luna.
We see a healthy, joyous teenaged Frida running through the halls of her high school in a schoolgirl outfit. This is a common formula of the biopic. Start at almost the end, then flash back to the beginning. She and her classmates run to see her future husband, Diego Rivera, painting a naked woman in the school's auditorium. Frida and her friends are all aspiring bohemians. Frida yells, "Watch out, Diego, Lupe's coming back." His current wife, Lupe, arrives to yell at him for being unfaithful, throws a lunch basket at him, and leaves. Frida and her boyfriend make out in the closet at her house. We see that she does not fit the idea of how a proper young lady behaved in the early 20th century. And we also see her relationships with her family, that she's close with her dad, conspiratorial with her sister, Christina, and that she drives her mom crazy. For example, she wears a 3-piece suit for family photos in the lead up to Christina's wedding. Later, Frida and her boyfriend are running to catch a bus. This is the day her life changes.
Her mom has one setting, which is disappointed. Her mom is always just looking at her like, God, you're the worst. And this is the second movie now where we've seen a mom who is just cannot even deal with their genius child, because we saw this in Rocket Man too. I find it so interesting to think about being the parent of a genius artist and just looking at them and being like, why do you have to be so weird? But anyway, the bus accident is so awful. She's looking at some gold flake that is going to be applied to a piece of artwork, and she's handling it, and then the bus goes all sideways and the gold flake goes everywhere. And the next shot you see of her is she's twisted up like a pretzel and covered in gold and bleeding, and it's so awful.
Looking at this, I found myself thinking, why? How is it a good idea for anyone to ride on this thing? It looks like a safety hazard on wheels. I felt very grateful for plastic and modern traffic signals. She wakes up 3 weeks later from a coma, and they don't know if she'll walk again. To get a sense of Frida's injuries from Hayden Herrera. Her spinal column was broken in 3 places in the lumbar region. Her collarbone was broken, and her 3rd and 4th ribs. Her right leg had 11 fractures, and her right foot was dislocated and crushed. Her left shoulder was out of joint, her pelvis broken in 3 places. The steel handrail had literally skewered her body at the level of the abdomen. Entering on the left side, it had come out through the vagina. And when you see her, she's impaled on this guardrail.
Don't understand how you survive an impaling. That's my response to the horror that you just read. How do you survive that? Horrifying. And that's me, that's my medical school education right there. They followed this with a really great sequence that was sort of a puppet show where we're seeing how they treated all of the injuries that you just described and show us how they kind of put her back together and how the doctors were trying to, you know, save her and make her a whole person again. You do really sense how lucky she is to be alive. She is essentially bound up head to toe in plaster. And I think that it's a real challenge in a visual medium to communicate the level of pain that someone might be experiencing. The film does a really good job of showing physically like the stress that her body is put under as they're trying to figure out how to help her recover. Her father is trying to figure out ways to pay for more treatments, and we see her getting put into and taken out of casts, and the pain that this evinces in her. And then Diego Luna helpfully shows up and he says, I'm going to Europe with my family and I think we're done here. And Frida is very devastated by this. And also at this point, as she is bound up and unable to move around, her father brings her some art supplies so she can start painting. So we're getting this really great mix of seeing the agony that she's in, but also seeing how that agony inspired her art and to share the experiences of that pain and communicate that through her work.
So in real life, that relationship with Alex, the character played by baby Diego Luna, lingered for a few years, including after he came back from Europe. And one of the things that they don't show was she was up and walking around actually about 90 days after the accident. Their relapses from the accident were worsened over time, just to give you an overall idea of what she was dealing with. Again, from Hayden Herrera. Frida had at least 32 surgical operations, most of them on her spine and her right foot, before she succumbed 29 years after the accident. She lived dying, said the writer Andres Henestrosa, another close friend for many years. The first relapse evident in Frida's letter to Alejandro in September of 1926 came about a year after the accident, when in real life they're still dating. A bone surgeon discovered that 3 vertebrae were out of place. She had to wear various plaster corsets that kept her immobilized for months, as well as a special apparatus for her right foot. Apparently, at the time of the accident, the doctors at the Red Cross hospital had neglected to check the condition of her spine before they presumed her to be mended and sent her home. Frida said, "No one paid any attention to me. What's more, they did not take x-rays." Her letters reveal that certain necessary medical treatments were not performed because her family could not afford to pay for them. When they could, the treatments were often ineffective.
But she recovers enough to reintroduce herself to one Diego Rivera, and he immediately takes interest in her and in her work. I want to ask you a question because I was thinking about this after watching the movie. Am I not supposed to like Diego Rivera?
He's supposed to be a flawed, complicated human being. They capture a certain charm that he must have had. And again, from Hayden Herrera, there's this excerpt that I loved about the manner in which Diego Rivera handled his expulsion from the Mexican Communist Party, just to give you an idea in terms of likability. Diego arrived, sat down, and took out a large pistol and put it on a table. He then put a handkerchief over the pistol and said, "I, Diego Rivera, General Secretary of the Mexican Communist Party, accuse the painter Diego Rivera of collaborating with the petit bourgeois government of Mexico and of having accepted a commission to paint the stairway of the National Palace of Mexico. This contradicts the politics of the Comintern, and therefore the painter Diego Rivera should be expelled from the Communist Party by the General Secretary of the Communist Party, Diego Rivera." Diego declared himself expelled, and he stood up, removed the handkerchief, picked up the pistol, and broke it. it was made of clay. On some level, you gotta love the guy.
That is very funny. And also just points out, communists take themselves so seriously. There's a certain age in which someone sort of turns to communism and becomes insufferable. And usually it's freshman year of college, and it usually passes. I find this to be the more like charming, ridiculous communism of that rather than the evil communism that we've come to know because of things like Rocky IV and Red Dawn. I can picture that sequence with Alfred Molina, who seems like one of the most delightful people who's ever lived. And he is a wonderful actor. I was coming away from it thinking, was I supposed to not like him? Because I kind of love him. Diego starts bringing her around to meet some of his friends who are in the art world and in the messy politics of freshman year communism. And he introduces her to Ashley Judd, who is playing Tina Mondotti, David Alfaro Siqueiros, who you mentioned earlier. And she also meets Diego's estranged wife, who is played by Valeria Golino, who we never see enough. It's not clear if he's done the paperwork with his ex-wife or former wife, but there's a lot of cool people at the party, and I feel like communists like kind of expect their exes and their current partners to all get along. And also Frida is instantly like very magnetic to everyone at this party. A lot of people are really attracted to her and get attracted to her energy. And she does this amazing tango with Tina that is so well shot. And Ashley Judd is very beautiful in this movie and always really solid in her work. But this whole party that they go to is a really like well executed sequence.
There are multiple stories of how the meeting between Rivera and Frida occurred. We're seeing one of them here. So after he comes to her place to critique her art, following her just showing up with her paintings and saying, "Come down here and look at my art, Diego." He takes her to this party, and the 1920s are in full swing. She meets his ex-wife Lupe, as he mentioned, and Lupe warns her that Diego has slept with half the women at the party and that he has a way with women where he looks at you as if all of your flaws are perfection or something. I forget exactly what she says. Diego gets into a fight with Siqueiros, the other Mexican muralist. There were actually 3 big Mexican muralists, and the third one, Orozco, is not at this party. They get into a fight about lefty stuff. My note here is that at least Diego is slightly on the right side of history for not liking Stalin, because this other guy, played by Antonio Banderas, loves Stalin and is everything I hate about lefties, including being a totally obnoxious purist. Just his conversation is like a cheese grater on my skin. Diego pulls a gun out and shoots the record player. Tina's way of diffusing this situation is to bring over a bottle of hard liquor, and she says, "Whoever takes the longest swig from this gets to dance with me." Frida takes the longest drink, and they do a very sexy tango. Siqueiros and Diego sort of resolve it, where one of them says, "I would rather have intelligent enemies than stupid friends," and they laugh. It was a good line.
Antonio Banderas is continuing his run as just an absolutely stunningly gorgeous man in this movie. It is too little of him in this film. Diego and Frida get married, and the wedding sequence is really well shot. They shoot it in a way that is very evocative of Frida's artwork. And again, here's his ex-wife hanging out at the wedding, just there getting drunk. It's very strange.
Leading up to the wedding, we have a quick montage about leftist activity as a form of dating. Diego takes Frida to his studio where they say, "Let's always be friends," but then they have sex anyway. He looks so giant and hulking next to her. I think his weight was close to 300 pounds and hers was around 98 pounds. Her family called it the marriage of the elephant and the dove. The contrast is made that he paints what he sees and she paints from the heart. And when he proposes to her, I especially liked the verbal exchange. Frida says, but you don't believe in marriage. And Diego says, of course I do. I've had 2 wives already. So she goes into this marriage knowing that he won't be faithful to her, but asks for his loyalty. However, they don't iron out the details of what exactly his loyalty entails in terms of where and how and with who he steps out. Tina makes one hell of a toast at the wedding that sort of alienates Frida's parents. And yes, Lupe comes in drunk to pick a fight. This is a thing that some people say happened at the wedding. Others say it didn't. Lupe pulls up her dress and points out how much better her legs are than Frida's. And then I guess it's supposed to be either the next day or shortly thereafter. Frida comes down to breakfast, and there's a delicious breakfast ready for them because Lupe is still living upstairs and cooking for them. It's not what Frida signed up for when she asked for loyalty. Lupe shows her how to cook for him and talks about what it's like to be married to Diego. There's a fun moment where they don't know which of them should answer to Senora Rivera. Next, we have some scenes from the marriage where Frida is navigating not being hurt while having an unfaithful husband. They go out drinking. She flirts with other men. There's a bar fight.
Can I also just add in here, too, that the woman who's singing in this bar scene, the actress playing her, had a real-life affair with Frida Kahlo, according to IMDb.
She's remarkably well-preserved to have had an affair with Frida Kahlo and still be singing in this movie.
Indeed. And then we go to New York, which is super fun. I loved this sequence. We see them go to New York City in the 1930s because Diego has been asked to do a show in New York, and he's bringing Frida with him.
Diego announces that he has a show in New York, but he's taking her with him, which assuages some of her worries because Lupe had said to her, well, as soon as he goes out of town for a show, he's going to pick some other woman.
I love the way this was filmed and put together with like some sort of stop motion animation. And thought that this just looked really cool, and it was very Julie Taymor. And she did it with the stop motion paper animation and really kind of compared Diego to King Kong taking over the city and kept drawing that contrast and really captured the energy of, you know, going to New York and being an artist during this time period. The movie is really episodic. This is one of those points where you feel a little bit like the effect of 5 writers and 1 unofficial writer tying it all together, because there is kind of an unevenness to the way the story gets told and the narrative flow. And this is one of those points where you feel that shift. This sequence in particular had a really different energy than other parts of the movie.
Sarah, can you give me some information on what happened here with Edward Norton?
Of course, I'd be happy to. So I want to add here first too, Edward Norton and Salma Hayek were in a relationship at the time. And Salma Hayek was asked to get a complete rewrite of the film by Harvey Weinstein, and get it done for free or with very little money. Edward Norton is pretty accomplished at script doctoring in his spare time. Edward Norton came in and did an overhaul and a pass on this film and helped develop the historical context and added some more humor to it while also adhering very closely to Frida's personality. As context for Edward Norton's ghostwriting career, he very famously took over the final cut of the movie American History X because he did not care for Tony Kaye's initial cut. So he went in and re-edited it. I don't know how all this works with the studios and if they're cool with it, but it's something that he has done on occasion where he has come in and done work on his films behind the scenes. And he was a pretty awesome boyfriend for coming in and doing that and getting no credit for it whatsoever. And Salma Hayek has spoken about that and how grateful she was for him to do that for her.
He probably knew what was going on with Harvey Weinstein, but he wasn't quite on the same level as Brad Pitt, so he couldn't do what Brad did, where in a famous moment of gallantry, Brad told Harvey to back off of Gwyneth Paltrow.
I can only imagine what this dynamic was like for them, because Salma Hayek wasn't an artist in the position to push back or take this film to another studio. It's gross and disappointing what she had to go through to make this movie, because it's not just the kind of work that people sometimes have to do to bring a passion project to its finishing point. She was forced to sexually humiliate herself and asked to do impossible things in order to make this film happen. Excuse my language, I apologize, but like, fuck Harvey Weinstein. He's the worst.
Anyway, so the scenes that we see in New York, actually, the Riveras were all over the country. There were some parts that they show happening in New York that happened in Detroit. But when they get to New York, he has been hired to paint this famous mural in Rockefeller Center.
We also see that Diego, when he's not making flaccid stances around communism, is having many relationships with the women in New York City. We see them coming in and out of their hotel, and Frida, to her credit, decides to get in on that action. At one point, we run into Saffron Burrows, who has a relationship with both of them. And I don't know if you noticed this, when they're in the diner together, the actress serving them in the diner is Didi Khan from Grease, the actress who played Frenchie.
I did not notice.
I heard the voice first, and her voice is very distinctive, and then looked up and realized, my gosh, that's Didi Khan, just popping in and popping out of this movie. And also good on Saffron Burrows for getting with both of them. Bravo, lady.
There is a sad moment in here for the Riveras. In real life, this was one of 3 times that Frida was unsuccessfully pregnant. There was at least one case where she had to have an abortion for medical reasons, but she wants the baby, and Diego doesn't want her to be in pain. And she says, I'm always in pain. The doctor isn't optimistic. She has a miscarriage where she bleeds out. She's rushed to the hospital. And in real life, this happened in Detroit, and that's what her painting Henry Ford Hospital is about. She does a painting of a dead baby in formaldehyde, and then she finds out that her mother is dying and goes back to Mexico.
Her mom gives her one last sour face sigh and then drifts off into the eternal space.
Frida returns to New York, where the controversy around the destruction of Diego's mural is shortly underway. And now it is time for my Rockefeller was right lecture. Are you ready? Honestly, the Rockefellers are being very flexible in putting up this mural that shows the workers' struggle. Diego Rivera, and in real life he was under pressure from his lefty assistants for working for the man. He adds an image of Lenin, which was not in the original design, and John D. Rockefeller Jr., played by Edward Norton, asks him to please remove Lenin. My opinion here is that the Rockefellers were right, and they're already having this workers' struggle-themed artwork that undermines them symbolically in the center that they're building to provide jobs in New York during the Great Depression, to diffuse the political economic situation, when they could choose to just sit back and build piles of gold all over the family estate. The anti-capitalist theme in the mural was already plenty obvious and subversive enough without bonking the viewer over the head with a depiction of Lenin. Diego says it's the people's wall, and I have a hard time respecting someone who doesn't respect property rights and the disrespectful, again, attitude of entitlement with which he mocks his patrons behind their backs. Diego shot himself in the foot influence-wise here. If Diego had agreed to paint Lenin out of the painting, it would have meant that people going to work at NBC for decades and people going into 30 Rockefeller Center would have seen this celebration of things from an angle of workers' empowerment. Rivera gave up his ability to have any influence because he had to go and be a big purist, which is a motive I absolutely despise. And also, when he took the check from the Rockefellers, he said that he was going to spend every penny of it creating revolutionary art in New York. So he did a bunch of murals and paintings for various workers' halls and collectives around New York. And out of these, I think the figure I saw was that he did 20 or 30 of the works of painting for various radical workers groups. And only about 8 or so of these have survived because those workers groups just dissolved and nobody cared enough to take care of the art. It held no influence. And if he had just painted what he originally said he was going to paint and not gone rubbing Lenin in the faces of his benefactors and Americans who like owning stuff, he would have had a much more influential platform for this beautiful piece of art.
It's a huge bummer that he is a big baby about his art and his purity. Just take the check and paint what you say you're going to paint. I think we're going to come across, as episodes go on too, as we're talking about taking a hard stand and principled stances across, political things and whether or not they matter. This is one of those times where, you know what, this didn't matter.
It didn't, and he gave up his platform. You've known me for 20 years, so I'm sure you've heard me fly off the handle about this, but I hate purists, Sarah. I hate purists so much. And actually, what this reminds me of just now is way back in our first episode on The Doors, when they have that controversy about selling their song to Oldsmobile. It just struck me as so absurd that anyone ever cared about this, because now commercialization is a great way to bring your music to new audiences. And I think what I said in that episode was that Jim is insufferable and he's still just like, I'm a purity, but my art, man. Yeah, and I feel like he and Diego should just go have a drunk pity party.
It's insufferable and it's annoying. And there's something about communist purists that rankles me. He denied having that art in a place where it was going to be really well taken care of and it was going to outlive him in a really incredible way. It's a loss for us, but also it's a loss for, a principled stance that ultimately comes to nothing. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. And then we're back in Mexico, and her sister is struggling in her marriage and is going to leave her husband because she is being abused. And Frida is such a good sister that she takes her in and takes her sister's 2 small children to the carnival and comes home and finds Diego having sex with her.
Diego!
I mean, not your wife's sister.
Get it together, guy. Loyalty, that doesn't mean sleeping with your wife's sister under any dissection of the word. So Frida moves out. She cuts off most of her hair. There's a painting that this resembles. Lupe comes to check in on her, and then Frida goes to visit with her dad. And then Diego tells Frida that he needs her to welcome Trotsky to Mexico with him. Trotsky comes to her dad's house, which is sort of turned into a fortress.
Yeah. First, I love the dynamic between her and Roger Rees in this movie as her father. He was really delightful in this and a really supportive, wonderful dad. Trotsky's arrival is really a great sequence. And you see him getting out of the car. You see how much protection they had to get set up for him because he's basically on the lam from Russia and those never at all vengeful Russian agents that come after traitors. Then you see them all sitting at the dinner table and they're having the most nightmarish conversation of your pretentious art school friends, which is who's worse, Hitler or Stalin?
They don't know the full extent of things in Germany yet, although Frida's dad was Jewish, so she did speak early about not liking Hitler, to her credit. And there was one time in their tour of the US when Frida and Diego refused to stay in a hotel that didn't take Jews.
Trotsky's feeling is that Hitler is at least a man with a vision and passion, whereas Stalin is just an apparatchik.
They both have an 8-figure body count. Not a fan either way.
And then Frida and Trotsky start spending some time together, and she really likes how he looks at the world, and they have a kindred spirits quality there.
Frida and Trotsky climb a pyramid together. Don't know if this really happened. I don't know if they really climbed Teotihuacan.
IMDb says that this didn't happen, but they do have a really lovely and sad conversation.
They talk about how all of Trotsky's children are dead due to his political activity. I don't want to like Trotsky because I don't like communism. I don't like people who think they have a right to take my stuff. But he's kind of a silver fox here.
Yes, and he's played by Jeffrey Rush, who is, of course, a very striking and handsome man. So Trotsky comes by it honestly in this film. And I would say that I don't hate communists for any reason except that I dislike how boring it is to be around them. It's the purity and the smugness that they kind of embody. And maybe that's just the people I've met who say that they're communists or socialists, but there could be some lovely ones. They start hooking up and it's hot stuff. IRL, this did not last that long. It doesn't last that long in the movie either because Trotsky has inconveniently brought his wife on this trip and is also staying at the house with them. So it's awkward. Natalia Trotsky is devastated by this affair and she wants it to end, and Trotsky, to his credit, honors that in his wife, and he and Frida end the affair. Trotsky decides to move houses, and at this point there's kind of a vague implication that it is Frida Kahlo's fault that he gets killed eventually, and Diego is pissed.
Diego doesn't mind if his wife has affairs with women, but only he's allowed to cheat with members of the opposite sex, and it's supposed to be okay. All of this was after his apology to her for sleeping with her sister was, "I'm a beast," which is not an apology.
That is officially not an apology. And also suspect that he was envious of the fact that Frida got to have sex with Trotsky.
Because he worships Trotsky.
He's all, but I love him more than you. I'm a super fan. It's amazing how angry he gets at this because first, where do you get off and how dare you? And then second, I think he's just envious of the fact that she got there first.
Well, Frida was not the only woman that Trotsky fooled around on Natalia with. I have this highlighted in Hayden Herrera's book. Again, for all his years, the Russian's physical presence was impressive. He carried himself like a hero. His gestures were dynamic, his stride military. Piercing blue eyes behind round tortoise-shell glasses and a firmly set jaw transmitted intellectual fervor and tenacity. And although he had humor, there was about him a certain commanding severity. He was a man used to getting his way. He was also a man with a vigorous interest in sex. Around women, Trotsky became especially animated and witty, and though his opportunities were few, his success seems to have been considerable. His was not a romantic or sentimental approach. He would fondle a woman's knee under the table or make an unabashedly forthright proposition. At one point, his lust for Christina, the sister that Diego also slept with, led him to plan a kind of fire drill, a practice escape over the garden wall at night, plus a dash to Christina's house on Aguayo Street. Only the expressed misgivings of his entourage, and possibly Christina's own fond but firm disinterest, finally dissuaded him from this reckless adventure. Dude got around.
Being a hero of the Communist Party has to get you places sexually.
There's this moment where Frida comes to meet him at some, sort of safe house they've set up for the rendezvous, where even though he's old, he picks her up and sweeps her off her feet into the room. And there's a part where he's on the microphone recording his Leninist commentary, and he stops for a moment and pulls Frida into his lap for this joyful minute. And then after the pause, he gets back on the microphone and he's like, so continuing about Lenin.
He's kind of dreamy.
I know. And I hate communism.
I was obsessed with them getting together. I was also really annoyed at the movie for introducing this protecting a communist leader from assassination subplot 30 minutes before the movie ending.
The whole course of an artist's life, it can be more episodic when it comes to the things that are interesting to show. And then Frida goes off to Paris for her exhibit while Diego sorts things out. I am dismayed by how dashing Geoffrey Rush's portrayal of Trotsky was.
You can't put Geoffrey Rush in the part and not make the character somewhat endearing to me, because Geoffrey Rush is a really delightful actor to watch. It's science. And I thought this was a good point in which to introduce you just to a little game I wanted to play with you in the spirit of our professed passion for Trotsky, called Would You Hook Up with This World Leader? I thought it might be fun to go through a list of other world leaders and talk about whether you would hook up with them when they were at their peak attractiveness. And by hook up, I mean like make out.
Let's do it.
Okay, so Teddy Roosevelt.
Hell yes.
Yes.
He's energetic, absolutely brilliant, has a deep capacity for emotion.
I personally think that Teddy Roosevelt is the most attractive man to ever hold the office of President of the United States.
Really, I would have ranked him 5th or 6th.
No, I think TR was, because I think I also closely associate him with Ron Swanson. There's overlapping Sarah issues here. But I do think that he was the most attractive president we ever had for many reasons.
Are you talking in terms of personality or physical appearance or the combination?
The whole package. And he's why we have the Museum of Natural History, my favorite place in New York City.
Oh, all right. Let's try another.
Robert F. Kennedy, not Jr., the first one.
In a heartbeat. Although I'm sure he and his brothers probably each had the clap or worse at some point.
Yeah, probably. The odds of being one peroned by a Kennedy are probably pretty high.
Oh, yeesh. Ethel lived a good long life, so whatever Bobby was doing, he at least didn't give her cervical cancer from human papillomavirus.
That's a good point. Joseph Stalin.
Ew! Come on!
Look him up when he was young and tell me that you do not think that young Joseph Stalin was attractive.
Oh, sugar. Yeah.
Yeah.
I really don't want to.
It's okay. It's okay.
Murdering over 10 million people, not to mention siding with Hitler for the first part of the war. Also, gulags, not hot.
No, it's not great. The personality is not great.
I don't think his personality was ever that great. Maybe that was why he wanted to get rid of Trotsky. Trotsky probably took all the dames. And even with that face, young Stalin still looks like someone with a really overbearing personality.
He is a man who always has to be right.
He looks like some mansplainer that you'd see in sociology class, right down to that checkered scarf.
Yeah, he's going to tell you why you're going to like communism.
He's going to neg you, and you're going to fall for it.
Yeah, it's a real, like, yeah, you dumb broad. You don't know how good communism would be because you're a dumb broad. You'd be like, hey, you're cute.
He'd say, like, you think you like handbags and fancy things because you're shallow and you don't care about the people.
And I'd hear that and I'd be like, can we go out?
And he'd look all steamy. Ugh. I feel disgusting and disgusted.
Okay, let's move on. Chairman Mao.
He didn't brush his teeth.
Really? Okay, hard pass. King Leopold II.
Yuck, hard pass on the beard.
Also massacred over 10 million in the Congo. King Henry V.
The medieval haircut is kind of awkward. Like, he has that back cut that people kind of did in the 90s too, with like the bowl thing going on. But yeah, I would.
Same. King Louis XIV.
I guess power is sexy, and he was the king. If I found myself at Versailles in the 17th century, possibly would be swept away by power, just like every other woman there.
His hair is also a lot, or rather, his wig is a lot of look.
He made that the style. Men wore wigs for about 140 years because of him. And you still see the reflection of that in those barrister and judge wigs that they have in the UK, which I love because I love arcane traditions. But they have that way of wearing it now where you see the hair peeking out from underneath it, and that looks weird.
I do love a silly tradition, but they look very foolish now.
Which just makes me want to keep them all the more.
Lorenzo de' Medici.
Yes.
Same. Fidel Castro.
He is in insufferable dude bro territory.
Agreed, but he was also very handsome in his youth.
So, I have a few for you. Ho Chi Minh.
Okay, Ho Chi Minh, let's see.
If you look at the ones where he's young, he might have bad skin in a few of them, but there's a fire in his eyes and cheekbones for days.
You're right. There is fire in his eyes, and there are cheekbones for days. And yeah, he's kind of gorgeous.
Next up, George H.W. Bush.
Which one is HW? Is that the older one or the younger one?
Sarah, this happened in our lifetimes. HW is the dad. W is the son.
I'm going to look him up in his prime, and he was very handsome. And I do love a rich, waspy white dude. I do love that. And also one who is engaged in shadowy power grabs.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I would.
Thomas Jefferson.
Hard no. Because of the slave owning thing, because of the slave raping thing, because he was over in Paris gallivanting while everyone else was founding the country.
But we did need someone to be in Paris to get money and boats and things from the French. But also, he has the baggage of can't get over his dead wife.
I still think you volunteer for that job because you don't have the balls to fight in the war. Hard pass. All red flags.
So my picks for the 5 handsomest presidents, and not necessarily in this order, it kind of shifts. I would have put Jefferson, Kennedy, Obama, Franklin Pierce, and FDR.
FDR is very foxy.
Yeah.
Also, he is a hero who built Social Security. I'm fascinated by all of the crazy stuff he had to deal with during his presidency. You know, he had the Dust Bowl, the Great Depression, repealing Prohibition, World War II, and he was crazy badass in how he gave himself to this country.
Golda Meir.
I dig her conviction. She was pretty amazing. I think the problem is that I'm pretty heteronormative. I don't know if I could develop honest attraction for her, but she is an impressive human.
She was never conventionally pretty, but she has such a force of personality about her, which is hot. But I accept your heteronormativity.
I'm very boring like that. You know who played her in Munich is Magda from Sex and the City, Lynn Cohen. And also Tova Feldsha has played Golda Meir on Broadway. A lot of great actresses have played Golda Meir.
Helen Mirren. I have one more for you. Nehru.
He's very handsome and also has cheekbones for days.
He was banging the viceroy's wife during independence negotiations.
That's crazy. And that is living on the edge in a way that you probably shouldn't live on the edge during that kind of negotiation. He also, if you Google young Nehru, there's a picture of him wearing his British barrister wig, which checks all your boxes. I know that is your thing.
Yeah, but do you know who the last do you know who the last viceroy of India was? Lord Mountbatten.
What?
Charles III's mentor guy who was killed by the IRA, also known to the British royals as Uncle Dickie if you watch The Crown.
My gosh. Here it is. Nehru and Edwina, an unconventional union. Okay, I love this. Why don't we have a movie about this?
Oh, this needs to be a movie. Nehru and Edwina cuckolding the viceroy should have been a movie and not boring Gandhi. In fact, when we get to Gandhi, I'm not going to bother reading anything about Gandhi. I'm just going to read whatever salacious things I can find about Nehru and the viceroy's wife, because Gandhi is boring.
This is your movie. What were we talking about? Were we talking about freedom?
Yeah, we were talking about Frida. We got distracted by which world leaders we would have hooked up with because she had an affair with Trotsky.
Yes. So picking back up, she is in France. We see the sex scene that Harvey Weinstein insisted upon between her and a Josephine Baker-esque singer.
There was no evidence that Frida Kahlo had sex with Josephine Baker.
No, and it was a Josephine Baker implication. It's entirely gratuitous and unnecessary. Then she returns to Mexico, where Diego wants to go through with a divorce. Trotsky is killed, and Diego is implicated in his murder. 20 minutes before this movie is over, and we have an assassination. So Diego is going to run to Los Angeles, and Frida gets arrested as a presumed accessory to the crime. And Diego eventually comes back and gets her out of jail and then proposes that they get married again.
At this point, her health goes into severe decline. She has to have the toes of the right foot amputated because they're gangrenous. This didn't happen until about 10 years after it's shown happening here, but whatevs. When Diego proposes to her, she says, "I have no toes on one foot. I have an infection in my kidneys," and lists all of her medical issues. And then she says, "I smoke, I drink, I curse." And he says that's practically a letter of recommendation, which is endearing.
Yeah, they did belong together in a lot of ways. And we've watched a lot of movies that feature a lot of unsupportive partners who are holding their partner back artistically and creatively, doing so through various tools of abuse. And it is very nice to see that for all of his many faults, in terms of his complete inability to be faithful and loyal, he never stymied her creatively, and he was her champion. He really let her flourish as an artist and encouraged her. And at no point do we see him sort of portraying any sort of insecurity around the fact that she was incredibly talented in her own ways as an artist.
My gosh, Sarah. Is this the first movie we've seen about a woman where nobody gets raped?
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah, on the good side of Diego, he tells the reporters who are in Rockefeller Center that she's the greater artist. He's supportive of her as her condition is shown worsening. And they go through the final decade of her life where she's in and out of braces and casts. She's painting lying on her front on the bed, and there's a few scenes of joy with them where they're on a boat with a beautiful meal laid out. But you see that declining because going through pain is irritating. Stuff hurts and keeps on hurting. Chronic pain is boring to endure. I feel like in a lot of films, when someone's dying, they become kind of saintly. And I liked it that this says, no, that's not how it works. There's a scene of her yelling at him at the table. When you're miserable, you make people around you miserable. And we've seen that she'd always tried to be as active as she could, even with the pain, and how hard it is for her that she can't even have that anymore. There's this one part where she's yelling for Christina to come and give her morphine. And I also loved it that they show the appearance of the house changing from, it was sort of rose-colored and kind of dilapidated when it was her dad's house and when the Trotskys were there. But it shows that turning into the bright blue Casa Azul that everyone loves. Then she finally gets a show in Mexico City, and we're back to the beginning. She's ordered not to leave her bed, so she has the bed carried to the exhibit with her in it. What actually happened was that she had the bed transported, and she came on a stretcher. But the movie kind of goes whole hog with it. And except for that Josephine Baker thing that we can blame on Harvey Weinstein, it hews to the truth a lot more closely than most biopics do.
Credit to Julie Taymor as a filmmaker, because she really used the medium to show the complexity of suffering and being in chronic pain, but also being someone who desperately wants to be alive, and showing those ups and downs with a lot of nuance and sensitivity. This movie did a really nice job playing in the gray areas of things with good artistry. We've talked about the challenges associated with showing a life in film in a narrative structure. Frida is at points episodic, but it also shows kind of the richness of her passage in a really accomplished and confident way. They did a good job making peaks out of certain moments, also showing kind of the broad road of going back and forth on things in a way that was compelling, which is super challenging.
I suppose it helped that Kahlo only lived to be middle-aged in terms of showing the full scope of her life, but it covered a much broader chunk of someone's life in terms of the little things we have to slice and cut. We don't really need to see all of her lovers. We don't need to see all 3 failed pregnancies. We get a good idea of what was significant. With that, did you have any selections for choice dialogue?
I didn't. Nothing grabbed me dialogue-wise, but as I said, the script was ultimately well managed by its many, many handlers. Did you have any choice dialogue?
I had 4 selections from the dialogue here as choice dialogue. Something that Diego says to Frida near the beginning. You have to trust a true compliment as much as a critique. And then, I mentioned this before, the first time that Diego proposes to her, where she says, "But you don't believe in marriage," and he replies, "Of course I do. I've had 2 wives already." Later, after he sleeps with her sister, she says, "There have been 2 big accidents in my life, Diego. The trolley and you. You are by far the worst." And then something she says to the doctor at her exhibit where she's in the bed and she's having a tequila, and she says, "Doctor, if you let me have this tequila, I promise not to drink at my funeral."
Loved the way she was all, "You told me not to get out of bed, so here I am." And she didn't. And I appreciated this movie quite a bit. The pace was at times a little languid for me, but I do think that Julie Taymor was really able to capture, similar to what we talked about with Rocket Man, where it is very challenging to get to the interior life of what it feels like to be someone who's making things, and how that movie was able to do that. And I feel like this movie was able to show her process and bring us inside her mind in a really unique way. To your point about the way the script was set up, we hit the key moments. We saw that revolving door in New York, and we got the picture. This did a great job of being economical with the storytelling, especially because this did follow that I was born to I died structure of biopic that can sometimes be a real drag.
With that flash from the end that goes back to the beginning that so many of them have. Beckett had that last week, and people do that a lot to try to feel like they're breaking linearity, but they're doing a trick that has been done so many times in the genre before. Let's move on to scoring. So for outward appearances, makeup and hair, I gave it a 9.
Same, 9.
They got that unibrow down, and I think Alfred Molina put on about 30 pounds to play Diego Rivera.
He did. And also about that unibrow, Harvey Weinstein didn't want her to have it.
Come on. Her whole thing was, I'm going to rock this unibrow and not pluck my mustache and dress flamboyantly anyway. She highlighted the imperfections that were ugly and rocked them confidently in a way where it was so incongruous that you had to look. And she was sexual despite, or perhaps because of it, with the confidence she presented with. If you take that out, it's not about Frida Kahlo anymore.
He explained that he thought it was distracting, and I'm guessing it was, please forgive me, distracting to his boner. And also anything that's going to make him not want to have sex with Salma Hayek, I guess, is too terrible to have in this movie. Acting and casting, I gave this a 9. You felt that this was clearly a passion project for Salma Hayek. And also, everyone really looked like themselves, with the exception of Ed Norton, who doesn't really look an awful lot like Rockefeller, but close enough. Everyone else really looked good and looked right. And then on top of that, their performances were really strong. I loved seeing the little bit parts with Ashley Judd, with Saffron Burrows, Antonio Banderas, Valeria Golino.
Gave it a 9.5. I thought everyone was excellent. Everyone was brilliantly cast. Passage of time, I gave it a 7.5. There were points where I didn't get quite how much time was passing, but overall I had a pretty good sense of where we were and when we were. And in that final sequence where there is about 10 years passing, they did a good job of aging Alfred Molina.
I gave it a 5. I didn't like how non-specific the timing was. There were clues throughout as to general time periods, but I felt like I could have used just a little bit more guidance on time passing. I would have liked to know a bit more about how long she was in Paris from watching the movie, or what precise year it was at certain points. And also that creepy baby Salma Hayek really tweaked me, and it just messed with me.
Costuming, I gave it a 9.
Same.
The costumes were gorgeous. They got everything for the era right. The people who were supposed to be super rich socialites looked glamorous, and Frida's costumes looked like things she actually wore. For quality of the script, I gave it an 8.
I gave it a 5. The pace was uneven. I felt that for the writing credits and the two uncredited writers structurally, I might be being a little bit hard on it. This is just another exhibit of how Aaron Sorkin has ruined me, where I was watching this and like, why can't this all be shown through the filter of their visit to New York? Or like, why can't this all be shown through the filter of her affair with Trotsky? I'm always looking for where's the way that you could compact this into a smaller spread of time without losing the grandeur now? And also, if you're going to introduce an assassination plot 20 minutes before the end of the movie, I am going to lose my mind.
On the flip side of that, there were so many interesting things that happened and so many encounters where if you narrow the focus, you lose that Banderas cameo that's so much fun, with stories that choose to be episodic. Sometimes there's 7 years between stuff where not that much is happening that you don't really need to see. It's a style of storytelling that you see in these things where there's differences in how awkward it is. I thought that for that style, it was well done. I appreciated how many different short-term characters we got to have fun with, and all of them were well written. So that's my defense of giving the script an 8. For accuracy, I gave it a 7. It was way better on accuracy than most of these things are. The dings being for the miscarriage that was in Detroit, not New York. Little evidence of the implied love affair with Josephine Baker, gradual dissolution of her first love with Alejandro, and can't find evidence that Frida and Trotsky climbed a pyramid.
I also gave it a 7 for accuracy, similar reasons to what you shared, particularly the gratuitousness of that sex scene. I thought it was really, really tacky. That Weinstein insisted on having that.
Go to hell, Harvey Weinstein. Honestly, 7 is probably the highest we've ever given for accuracy, and I will boldly predict that we're never going to give anything a 10 for accuracy. Okay, storytelling. Was it cliched? Was it interesting? Was it inventive? I gave it an 8 for storytelling. I loved the artistry of Julie Taymor's set pieces.
Same. I think she's so clever, and the way that she used the different techniques to tell the story was really great. And the only reason why I didn't give it even a higher score is because I felt like I wanted her to be able to lean into being Julie Taymor more. I know that she probably wasn't able to because maybe somebody named Harvey Weinstein was holding her back a bit. He apparently at an early screening screamed at her and threw a bunch of the audience impression cards at her. So he, also treated Julie Taymor like crap.
Production value. I gave it a 9. It's visually gorgeous. I loved how much we saw of Mexico City and that rickety looking bus that was like everything it was made of looked so hard and breakable and given to shattering into really sharp things.
Same, 9. I thought this was beautiful to look at. It was just so visually sumptuous and everything just looked great.
Production and direction decision making, I gave it an 8.5. I loved Julie Taymor's set pieces. I loved how she used the Day of the Dead ideation to show the operations and the horror of the accident. I loved the fun that she had with them. For example, the Riveras invade Gringolandia and King Kong. I loved how she used that for storytelling. She's always had such a unique eye for those things from her Broadway production of Lion King moving forwards. But here, I know we had some differences because I was looking at the decisions made by the people who were actively on set mostly.
I started with a high number, and then I dinged it down significantly to a 5 because of the Harvey Weinstein of it all. All of these people were hustling to make something beautiful and personal and true to this artist. And he comes in and he's all, it's not sexy enough. I hate him for making Salma Hayek do a gratuitous nude scene and for humiliating her again and again in the process of making this movie because he had that kind of power and he just could. Even seeing Ashley Judd in this movie is a mixed feeling because I know what that man did to her. I find his grubby little paws all over this really annoying, and I wish that he had stayed away from it because I get the feeling that this was probably an even weirder and more inventive and peculiar movie before he got into the conversation and started mucking with it.
Get where you're coming from on that. My quibble with that line of thinking is that it is punishing Salma Hayek and Julie Taymor for the sins of Harvey Weinstein. I wonder if somewhere there's a director's cut that has more of those wonderful visuals and no gratuitous nude scene, and I would like to watch that if it exists. I looked at what I saw in the end product that was still so gorgeous, and I did not think about Harvey beyond the gratuitous nude scene when I assigned that 8.5.
There's a really good argument to be made here from your POV, that it's not even about him in terms of, sometimes people in the production of a film and the direction of a film have to work with terrible circumstances. Julie Taymor and Salma Hayek deserve incredibly high marks for bringing this over the finish line in the manner that they did and with a vision as intact as it is, despite the fact that they had this hobgoblin monster man hovering over them and harassing her and trying to denigrate the art and get her boobs out, and lose the unibrow.
For Do We Care? I gave it a 9.5. I cared a lot about Frida and her artistic journey, and it was beautiful to watch.
I'm trying to be a little bit more discerning when I'm marking Do We Care because I care about everything. Ultimately came out to a 5. I cared enough.
My average came to 8.5. What was yours?
My average came to 7.1.
So the average comes to 7.8, and we don't get to do second opinion. It's been a while since we got to do second opinion. I really enjoyed it. I guess it was a Rena film more than it was a Sara film. I'm trying to think of one that you'd love and I'd hate. I bet I'd hate Star 80.
You might. It is a grimy, grimy movie.
I love a frock flick is part of what's going on here.
Yeah, it is not a frock flick.
I guess it's outro time.
If you like the show, Please leave us a 5-star rating and subscribe to us on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And tell a friend, or better yet, plural friends, and share us on social media. We hear it all helps.
Please tune in next week when we'll be talking about Race, the Jesse Owens biopic, in honor of the upcoming 2024 Olympics.
Woohoo! Also, piece of random, interesting trivia about Race that I am going to share with you now. John Boyega was originally cast as Jesse Owens, but he had to drop out to make some stupid little sci-fi movie.
What was the name of the stupid sci-fi movie, Sarah?
The Force Awakens. Thank you all for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.
Bye, everybody.
Good night.